The man I had loved for 11 years looked me straight in the eyes and said, "Let's get a divorce. I want to give her a legitimate status." And, just like that, the next morning, we walked into the county clerk's office, no tears, no argument, just quiet resignation on my end and a hint of impatience on his. Since that day, James Carter never came home again, and all I ever heard about him and that girl came from other people's mouths, not his. I cut off every bit of help I had ever given his company. I didn't want to see it burn, but I did want to see how far he could really go without me. The sky was so annoyingly clear that morning. The sun was smug in its brightness, and the breeze, light and crisp, mocked the mess I'd become. Still, I held it together. We walked into the office like a perfectly normal couple until James reached out to tuck a strand of hair behind my ear. He had always done that, every windy day, every fight, every goodbye. But today, that motion meant nothing. A staff member saw us and automatically assumed we were here for marriage registration, smiling and waving us over. "Excuse me," I said with a practiced calm, "we're here for a divorce." Her face froze, then she blinked hard like she didn't hear me right. Another clerk whispered something behind the desk, and I felt their stares follow me as we were led into a room. When asked the reason, James remained silent, his lips pressed into that familiar thin line. I didn't flinch. "Irreconcilable differences," I offered politely. "We just want different things." What a joke. The truth? James had already emotionally moved out of our marriage long ago. And for what? A girl who worked at the trendy little cafe downstairs from his office building. She picked him up from work, paid for his hospital room when he got sick, hovered like a dedicated sidekick. At the company's anniversary celebration, he bought her designer clothes and handed her the biggest bouquet in front of everyone. When asked about it, he proudly declared the event was sponsored because my girlfriend's performance is tonight. That girl, Vanessa Collins, wore her new status like a crown. And me? I was just her financier, apparently. The patron saint of their romance. That was the moment I realized when someone else has already touched your garbage, it's no longer mine to claim. The clerk tried to persuade us, "You've been together so long, maybe you're just being impulsive?" I smiled politely and said, "I'm very busy, please proceed." James responded with a cold yes. "Hurry it up." That shut everyone up real quick. 30 minutes later, I had a printed document in hand, our divorce cooling off period receipt. As I stepped out into the sun, James suddenly asked, "Emily, where are you headed?" "I'll give you a ride." Before I could refuse, he had already pulled the car around. Stupidly, I opened the passenger door out of habit. Then I remembered I am no longer his wife. I glanced at his face in the rearview mirror, saw the smug calm in his expression, and quietly moved to the back seat. "Please turn up the temperature," I said. "I'm allergic to pollen, and it gets worse when it's cold." He said nothing, but handed me a pack of tissues. I wanted to laugh. James knew me better than anyone. He knew damn well I wasn't allergic to pollen. "Mr. Carter," I said with an icy smile, "please don't call me Emily anymore. Use MS. Walker, if you don't mind." He looked stunned, then recovered quickly. "Fine. MS. Walker. I'll handle telling both sets of parents." He had always taken control, from what I ate to what shoes I wore, to who got informed first about anything in our life. But the James the first knew as a child wasn't like this. Back in preschool, he was a tiny, awkward, shy boy who got bullied often. I was the loud, extroverted tomboy who climbed onto the PA system to declare to the entire school, "James Carter is under my protection. Hurt him and deal with me." His mom used to bring me homemade cupcakes every Friday because I defended him so fiercely. I watched him grow from that fragile little boy into the golden boy of high school. In college, he was the heartthrob, and I was the best friend who helped him with every math assignment, even though he insisted I go to the same university as him just so we could stick together. I thought he meant academically. He meant forever. On graduation day, he took me to the campus observatory where his friends from the student union had arranged a fake Starry Night light show just for us. When he held my hand and asked me to marry him, I didn't hesitate. I swear on my life I'll treat you well forever, he said, his palms sweaty and trembling. Back then, I believed him. But now, looking at the same man steering the car like he still had a right to care, I felt only detachment. Mr. Carter, I'll handle telling my parents, I said. I don't need your help anymore. He frowned slightly, that arrogant twitch of his mouth rising like I had just betrayed some sacred code. Then, as if he was fishing for something, he asked, So, how are you going to tell them? I didn't answer. What? He sneered. Getting cold feet already? I finally looked up from my phone and met his eyes through the mirror. Can you please focus on the road and not kill your ex-wife on her first day of freedom? That shut him up. But his knuckles whitened around the wheel. Then came the worst part. His phone rang through the car Bluetooth system. The ringtone? Some overly sweet TikTok song about eternal love. The caller? Vanessa Collins. James, she purred, I've been in classes all day and working late. I'm starving. I stared blankly out the window, refusing to flinch. He smiled into the mic and said, Poor baby, I'll get you your favorite seafood porridge and crab roe buns, okay? They kept talking as if I wasn't even there. After he hung up, I calmly said, Drop me off at the next intersection. The car stopped. I got out without saying a word. Only when he was out of sight did I finally clutch my stomach. Cold sweat poured down my back. I nearly collapsed onto the sidewalk. Because 2 months ago, while running an errand for James, I got hit by a truck while delivering his very important documents. It shattered my left leg in a dozen places. I cried in that hospital bed, dialing him over and over. His phone? Off. He'd flown to Paris because Vanessa mentioned she'd never seen French pigeons. While I was getting metal rods screwed into my bones, he was sipping wine under the Eiffel Tower. I didn't tell my parents. Olivia, my best friend, was the one who stayed with me through it all. And that's when I knew I was done. Completely, irrevocably done with James Carter. And I wasn't looking back. After that nauseating car ride and James dropping me off like I was an Uber client instead of the woman he'd once begged to marry, I went home, heated up some leftovers, and forced myself to eat in silence. I wasn't even halfway through washing the dishes when Olivia messaged me. Emily, seriously? You haven't even finalized the divorce yet and James is already celebrating publicly with his mistress? Can you believe the nerve of this man? Attached to her message was a photo, James Carter and Vanessa Collins seated at that romantic couple's restaurant, the one I once begged James to take me to on our anniversary, only for him to coldly reply, Work's too busy. There he was now, laughing over wine with her like nothing in the world had ever hurt him. My stomach lurched so violently I barely made it to the bathroom in time. At first I thought it was just emotional nausea, but something inside me whispered otherwise. The next morning, I went to the hospital alone, hands cold, mind blank. When the doctor reviewed my blood work, she smiled and said, Congratulations, MS. Walker. You're 13 weeks pregnant. I blinked at her like she had just spoken another language. 13 weeks. 3 months. It didn't even feel real. The child we had wanted for so many years, the one we thought would never come, had finally arrived, now that we were divorcing. Schedule the termination, I said flatly. Her smile faded, but she nodded. I walked out of the clinic, numb, until my eyes met a familiar silhouette outside. James. And Vanessa. Holding hands. Laughing. As if they'd just come back from brunch. My heart clenched for a second, then I straightened up, clutching my bag tightly. Vanessa spotted me first. Her reaction was priceless. She immediately ducked behind James like I was a serial killer. James looked annoyed and tired, like I was some fly buzzing around his perfect day. Emily, he said, don't follow me around like this. We agreed to separate peacefully. Vanessa is very sensitive, and you're stressing her out. Interesting, I replied calmly. This is the OB/GYN wing. Are you sure I'm the one following you? That made him pause. You know we're not legally divorced yet, right? If your girlfriend is pregnant, it's technically still adultery. I turned to leave, but a voice called from behind. Emily. I turned to CDR. Nathan Reed walking toward me in his white coat, his eyes full of concern. Is your leg okay? How's your rehab going? Thanks to you, I smiled. I'm walking fine again. James stared at us like he'd been slapped. Who is this? He snapped. How do you two know each other? Nathan ignored him completely, placing a gentle hand on my arm. James marched over and yanked my other shoulder. What rehab? It was just a bruise, wasn't it? That's when I realized had no idea. He really thought it was just a scratch. His secretary must have downplayed it, and James, ever the genius CEO, didn't bother to check how long I was hospitalized or notice the way I'd been limping ever since. My injury isn't your concern, I said, shaking him off. We're divorcing, remember? His jaw clenched. Vanessa started crying out of nowhere, real crocodile tears. MS. Walker, I've always told James to treat you better. I never meant for this to happen. You can hate me, curse me, slap me, just don't blame James. She sobbed like she was auditioning for a soap opera, and I almost laughed. Let me clarify a few things, I said. First, I'm an only child. Second, this isn't a drama series. No one's buying what you're selling. Not even Hulu. She froze. Then, realizing I wasn't reacting the way she'd hoped, she clutched her belly and gave James a wounded look. Predictably, he melted. He pulled her into his arms, glared at me, and warned, there's a 29-day cooling-off period. Don't cause trouble, Emily. You know how I am. Push me, and you'll only end up embarrassing yourself. Got it, I said, and walked off without looking back. Nathan caught up to me in the hallway and gently asked, Are you okay? I wasn't. But when someone finally shows you care after months of abandonment, the dam breaks. Can you help me? I asked. Of course, he replied, without even asking what I needed. That afternoon, I had the abortion. Nathan arranged everything quietly, and I went through the whole thing alone. As I came out of anesthesia, groggy and in pain, I could have sworn I saw James's silhouette in the hallway. But I blinked again, and he was gone. Or maybe I just imagined it. Either way, I didn't care. From that moment on, I went completely silent. No calls. No texts. No fights. Just nothing. A week later, James barged into our apartment with Vanessa in his arms, giggling and kissing all over each other like they were in a music video. They didn't expect me to be home. I was just coming out of the closet room after changing clothes when I saw them. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just said, Excuse me. I need to get through. James froze. Vanessa instinctively backed away. Well, Vanessa, go wait outside, James said. She glared at me but left like a trained pet. I turned back to the closet to grab a bag, but James followed, pinning me between the door and his body. Dressing up like that late at night seeing someone, he sneered. Didn't think leftovers like you were still in demand. I didn't flinch. Instead, I slapped him hard across the face. Don't forget, I said, we're still technically married. I can change my mind anytime. You want Vanessa to stay a mistress forever. He was stunned. I shoved him away and walked out, only to run into Vanessa holding a glass of water. Looking gorgeous tonight, MS. Walker, she said with a fake smile. Got a hot date? I smiled sweetly and took the glass. Then I dumped the warm water over her head. Talk less, or next time it won't just be water. My phone rang. I picked it up with a smile and walked out the front door while James watched me leave, his expression twisted, his mouth too full of regret to speak. A sleek silver car pulled up, and I got in. Daniel Brooks looked at me concerned. Emily, are you sure? You know me, I said. I don't look back. Then let me help you. I turned to him and asked, Daniel, will you be my partner in this? He didn't hesitate. Always. We drove to a downtown lounge, walked into a private box, and the moment I stepped in, the crowd erupted. Emily, you're late. You're the one who planned this. Penalty shot. I downed the drink they handed me and smiled. These people weren't just friends. They were the backbone of James's company. Clients. Investors. Industry sharks. All of them loyal to me, not him. I raised my glass and made the announcement. James Carter and I are divorcing. Silence. Then the background music picked UPA's song that ironically played, Once, someone loved you for a long time, someone rushed to turn it off. You've been together forever, someone said, clearly in shock. 7 years married. Yeah, I said calmly. And he cheated. His little pet is pregnant. We filed last week. The room erupted. Swearing, gasping, clinking glasses. But I didn't care. I just smiled. I want to see how far he'll go without me. This isn't revenge. It's reality. They all nodded. They got it. James Carter was about to find out what it meant to stand on a platform built by someone else and then lose the one holding the foundation together. James Carter thought I was bluffing when I said I was done helping him, that I was cutting off all ties to his company, that I would watch him fall without lifting a finger. But what he didn't expect was how deep my roots ran into every inch of his empire, because for the past 7 years, every single partnership, every investor pitch, every press release, every crisis communication plan, every hot topic on social media that kept his name pristine was orchestrated by me, Emily Walker, the woman he once called his backbone, the woman he cheated on with a cafe barista, and the woman he would soon regret ever letting go, because 2 nights after my quiet declaration of war, I received a raging phone call from him. His voice hoarse and cracking like the edge of a cliff. Emily, who gave you the right to sell your shares without telling me? Do you have any idea what you've just done? I didn't even flinch. I was polishing my nails and barely looking at the screen when I replied casually, James, I'm no longer your wife. I don't owe you anything, not my time, not my money, and certainly not my loyalty. And after a long, seething pause, he said, fine, just name your price. I'll buy the shares back. You don't want them anyway, right? I laughed under my breath, market price. But don't forget, those are just the shares. We still have marital property to divide. And since I was the one who handled everything, all the cash deposits, real estate, and that downtown condo, 60% to me, 40% to you, just as we agreed. He fell silent for a beat, then grumbled, I don't have that kind of liquidity right now, and I smiled, then sell something. Or give me something better. That's when desperation really kicked in, because he suddenly offered, I'll give you the full marital property, just sign over the shares. I tilted my head, calculating, because even all the joint property wasn't enough to buy back what I was holding, not after the latest valuation spike I'd triggered by pulling strings through my contacts, so I pushed further. That's not enough, James. Weren't you just blowing money on your girlfriend's designer bags and European vacations? You owe me. Unless you'd prefer I sell the shares to someone else. His breathing became ragged, and with clenched teeth he growled, fine. I'll throw in 3 more of my premarital condos in the city center. Happy? Delighted, I replied, already planning the meeting with his legal team. We signed the next day. I walked out of the company building with an elegant smile and 4 real estate titles in my bag, while James sat behind his desk looking like he'd swallowed a razor blade. 2 weeks later, I returned home one evening and unlocked the door to find James sitting in my living room like some ghost from a past life, disheveled, eyes red, shirt wrinkled, rage simmering beneath the surface. What did you do to Vanessa? He snapped the moment I stepped inside. I blinked, completely unimpressed. Nothing. Why? She almost got hit by a car. She's been crying nonstop. Don't think I don't know it was your friend Olivia who embarrassed her at the cafe. I raised an eyebrow, suddenly amused. Oh, you mean how Olivia, a nationally ranked barista, asked for a cup of coffee and critiqued Vanessa's latte art in front of customers? That's her job, James. She critiques. Vanessa just couldn't take the heat. He looked like he wanted to explode, but I beat him to it. Let me be very clear, this apartment is my premarital property. At 3 p.m. I'm changing the locks. You can either pack your things or have them dumped at the curb. Your choice. He stared at me, stunned, then stormed out without another word. I didn't see him again until the class reunion, which I almost skipped. Olivia had to beg me to come, promising he won't be there, swear. Of course, she was wrong. The moment I walked into the private room, I saw James and Vanessa arm in arm like they were the new royal couple, chatting with our old professors like nothing ever happened, while I stood there wondering how someone could be so shameless. James and I had been the it couple. In college, everyone knew we got married after graduation. Our love story was practically school legend, and now here he was, showing off his mistress like a shiny accessory. But the awkward part? The room didn't react the way he expected. My classmates and professors weren't smiling. They weren't congratulating him. They were quietly judging. And I gave them exactly what they needed. I walked up to our old thesis advisor and smiled. "Professor, this is awkward, but James and I are divorcing." He cheated. "Vanessa here? She's the reason." Silence fell like thunder. You could hear a pin drop. Vanessa's smile froze. James went pale. "Cooling off period's almost over," I added casually. "We're signing the final paperwork this week." The shift in energy was instant. Classmates who'd been cozying up to him suddenly found urgent reasons to check their phones. Our professor's expressions hardened. James looked at me like I'd stabbed him in public, but I simply smiled and moved on to chat with people who actually mattered. After a while, I excused myself, saying I had another event to attend. But just as I reached the hallway, a hand grabbed my arm. I turned. James. His face was twisted with panic. "Emily, are you the reason the company's bleeding clients?" I blinked, tilting my head. "Is that what's happening already?" "You know it is. Don't play dumb." "James," I said sweetly, "we've been over this. I sold my shares. I'm no longer affiliated. If your empire is crumbling, that's on you." He didn't have a comeback. Just stood there stunned. "Also," I added, "the cooling off period ends tomorrow. Meet me at the county clerk's office at 10 a.m. Don't be late." And with that, I turned and walked into the adjacent private room, where Daniel Brooks stood up and pulled out a chair for me like I was royalty. "There you are," he whispered. "I saved you a seat." "Why are you always so good to me?" I asked, suddenly tired. "Because you deserve someone who never stopped seeing you," he said, handing me a plate and gently nudging food toward me. Daniel had always been in my life in the background, quiet, reliable, 2 years older, and someone I had known since high school, but never noticed the way I should have. Until now. In high school, he was the genius senior everyone talked about, the guy who got accepted early into college, the one whose name echoed through hallways and whose quiet strength made teachers swoon and girls swoon harder. I first met him when he helped me to the nurse's office after a classmate tripped me. He stayed beside me until I stopped crying, then handed me a napkin and a candy, like it was the most normal thing in the world. We kept in touch. Later, in college, he became the director of the student union while I worked in the promotions department. We collaborated on events, poster designs, media strategy, and though he never pushed, never flirted, he was always there. He didn't need my spotlight. He just stayed. And now, here he was again, older, calmer, stronger than ever, serving me dinner like it was the most natural thing in the world. Maybe I was finally seeing what had been right in front of me this whole time. The morning I signed the final divorce papers with James Carter felt strangely familiar, as if the universe had decided to play some sick joke by giving me perfect weather again, just like the day we got married. The early fall sun, warm but not hot. The breeze gentle against my skin, and yet this time there were no smiles, no flower petals, no champagne toasts, just cold paperwork and a pen that didn't tremble in my hand, because I had already signed 1,000 goodbyes in my heart before this one. And when I walked out of the county clerk's office with the final certificate of divorce in my bag, I didn't look back. I just walked straight toward Daniel Brooks, who was waiting for me outside in a tailored charcoal suit and soft eyes that didn't ask questions. And for a moment, I forgot the ache in my chest, until a voice behind me stopped me in my tracks. It was Vanessa Collins, standing there like she couldn't wait another second to drag James into the office to get there happily ever after. On paper, but the sight of Daniel, confident, tall, quietly magnetic, completely threw her off balance, and I could practically feel the jealousy radiating from her skin when she leaned toward James and whispered, "Is that her new boyfriend?" Loud enough for me to hear, and before I could think twice, I turned around, walked right up to her, and slapped her across the face so hard the street went silent. "Just because you're proud to be a mistress doesn't mean the rest of us are," I said calmly. Watch your mouth. And then I turned to James, whose expression had crumpled like paper under rain, and I said nothing, because there was nothing left to say. I just got in Daniel's car, and we drove away as if the last 11 years had never happened. And in that moment, I promised myself that from now on, I'd only look forward, never back, not even when it hurt, and definitely not when he begged, which he eventually did, but first came the unraveling, and it started fast within 2 weeks of finalizing the divorce. News broke that James Carter's company was hemorrhaging talent. His core business deals were being canceled. His sales teams were quitting en masse. And word on the street was that the new hires didn't know how to pitch to existing clients because, surprise, surprise, I had been the one training and managing those relationships all along, not James, and with me gone and my influence gone. The smooth machine he'd ridden to success fell apart one screw at a time, and I didn't even lift a finger. I just watched the collapse from a distance like someone watching a house of cards fall in slow motion. And then one night, after dinner with Olivia, I pulled up to my building and noticed a shadowy figure lurking near the gate. And my stomach turned because I already knew who it was. James Carter, the same man who had mocked me for being too emotional, now standing outside my building looking like a washed-up version of himself, his hair unkempt, his shoulders slouched like a man who had finally realized he lost the only person who ever made him worth anything. Emily, he called out softly, "Are you doing okay?" And I wanted to laugh, but I didn't. I just sighed and said, "Please call me Miss Walker. We're not on first-name terms anymore." And when he tried to step closer, I held up a hand. "What do you want?" And then he said something I didn't expect. "Vanessa, she left me after the company started falling apart. She took a huge chunk of money and ran. She aborted the baby." I reported her to the police, and for the first time, I hesitated, just briefly, my hand on the door, and I asked, "Why are you telling me this?" And he looked at me with hollow eyes. "Because you were the only real thing in my life, and I didn't see it until it was too late," and I almost pitied him, almost. Until I remembered the pain of waking up alone in a hospital bed with metal rods in my leg while he was off in Paris chasing pigeons with his mistress, so I simply said, "That sounds like a personal problem, Mr. Carter," and started to close the door, when he said quietly, "Do you remember the OB/GYN clinic? That day did you go there because you were pregnant?" And that stopped me cold, just for a second, but I didn't turn around. "If you have questions, ask your ghosts. I'm not one of them anymore." And I closed the door, this time all the way, and from that day on, I never saw James Carter again in person, but I kept hearing things: how the police uncovered that Vanessa was a professional con artist with a history of fraud, how she was sentenced to 20 years, how James's company officially filed for bankruptcy after its final game was pulled from all major platforms due to breach of contract, how his investors withdrew, how his reputation turned to ash, and how he used the last $200,000 he had to buy a plot in a cemetery and build a gravestone for a child that never lived, a daughter he never knew, but somehow believed existed, and every day after that, he visited the grave of a ghost, bringing flowers, talking to the wind, until his own parents moved away in shame, and no woman ever agreed to marry him again after hearing why his last relationship ended, and the man who once thought he was untouchable faded into silence like a forgotten myth. And as for me, I moved on it overnight, not easily, but truly. And 3 years later, when Daniel Brooks asked me to marry him, I said yes without hesitation, because for the first time, I wasn't choosing comfort or history. I was choosing someone who had shown up for me when it mattered, someone who never needed to be asked twice, someone who loved me the way I had always dreamed of being loved. And on our wedding day, he laid his head in my lap and said, "You're getting married for the second time, but for me, it's the first and only." And I laughed, because who knew the man I once thought was just a friend would be the one to teach me how to love again without fear. And somewhere in the crowd, I thought I saw James, standing at the edge of the garden in the suit I bought him years ago, looking smaller, older, sadder. But when I looked again, he was gone, or maybe he was never there to begin with, just another shadow I had finally outrun. Life after James Carter didn't begin with fireworks or some grand romantic comeback. It began with silence and space, and the unfamiliar absence of chaos, like walking through a house that used to be full of noise only to find that it now echoed with clarity. And in that quiet, I started putting my life back together piece by piece, without fanfare, without social media validation, just late nights, real friends, and the kind of inner peace that only comes when you finally stop trying to make broken things whole. And Daniel Brooks was there through it all, not like a savior riding in to rescue me, but like a steady rhythm beside my heartbeat, someone who didn't demand space in my life, but earned it without asking. And while I threw myself into work and started consulting for tech startups again, Daniel quietly introduced me to a new circle of professional founders, venture capitalists, legal teams, and for the first time, I was the one being offered a seat at the head of the table. Not as someone's plus one, not as the wife behind the man, but as the one calling the shots. And every time I walked into a boardroom, I remembered the way James used to smirk at my suggestions during his investor meetings, acting like I was just a placeholder in a skirt, and that memory fueled me harder than coffee ever could. So when one of Daniel's colleagues offered me a seat on the board of a new gaming company rising to replace Carter Interactive, I didn't hesitate. I signed the contract with a bold pen stroke and a calm smile, and it felt poetic, full circle poetic, the kind of satisfying irony life rarely gives you. And it wasn't long before people in the industry started noticing, whispering, speculating, asking each other how the ex-wife of a failed tech CEO was suddenly being courted by the very firms that once ignored her. And I let them talk, because their curiosity was the best PR I never paid for. But of course, the higher you rise, the more ghosts try to pull you back. And James, even after disappearing from the public eye, managed to reinsert himself into my narrative through the messiest way possibly: an anonymous leak, a whisper campaign, rumors on forums about how Emily Walker betrayed James Carter and stole his company, how I was only successful because of her ex-husband's reputation, and I wasn't surprised. Not really, but what did surprise me was how many people still gave his voice power, as if my worth was still tethered to the man who left me bleeding on a hospital bed while he fed croissants to a scammer in Paris. So I fought back, not with press conferences or dramatic statements, but with data, with receipts, with contracts and timelines and records that proved indisputably that every major investor had been mine, every media push had been mine, every crisis resolved had been mine. And when my legal team sent out the cease and desist letters, I made sure one of them went straight to the dingy one-bedroom condo James now lived in, under his cousin's name, because yes, I found out, I knew every address, every move, not because I was obsessed, but because I had finally learned that staying ahead wasn't about vengeance, it was about control, and I wasn't giving up mine ever again. And then, just when I thought I had heard the last of him, I got a call from an unknown number at 2 a.m., and for some reason, I picked up, half asleep, only to hear his voice, James's voice, cracked and low and full of everything he never said when it mattered. "Emily, I'm sorry." And for a moment, I didn't say anything, didn't breathe, because I wasn't expecting regret, not from him, not after all this time. But then he kept talking. "I went back to the house we used to live in. It's empty now, cold. It smells like you're still there even though you're not. And I just wanted to say I should have fought for us, and maybe 3 years ago, I would have cried hearing that. Maybe I would have taken the bait, softened. Wondered if maybe love still lived in the ruins, but now?" I just looked at the dark ceiling above my bed and said, "You didn't lose me, James. You gave me away." And I hung up and blocked the number, because closure wasn't something I owed him. It was something I gave myself the day I stopped waiting for him to be the man I thought he could be. And a week after that call, I heard from Olivia that James had left town, sold his car, and moved to a small coastal city where no one knew his name. And maybe that was the kindest thing life could do for him, give him obscurity, because after the fall, after the lawsuits and the media blackouts, the only thing James Carter had left was a gravestone for a child that never lived, a broken heart of his own making, and a list of regrets long enough to drown in. But me? I wasn't drowning. I was living, thriving, laughing again, eating dinner on rooftops with Daniel, spending weekends mentoring young women in tech, and finally wearing the bright red lipstick James once said was too bold for a wife. And Daniel? He never tried to dim me, never asked me to be softer, smaller, less. In fact, he leaned in when I was fierce and pulled me close when I was fragile. And the first time he whispered, "I love you," it didn't feel like a fairy tale. It felt like home. Warm and earned and real, and when we got engaged, I didn't post it online or host some elaborate announcement. I just told Olivia and our small circle, and that was enough, because not everything needs to be a spectacle, not every happy ending needs applause. Some just need peace. And on the night before our wedding, as I sat on our patio with a glass of wine in hand, I looked at the stars and let myself remember, not with sadness, but with gratitude, because every scar I carried led me here and tomorrow. When I walked down that aisle in a dress I chose for myself, with no one else's opinion involved, I would know that for the first time in a long time, I wasn't walking away from anything. I was walking toward everything I deserved. The morning of my second wedding didn't feel anything like the first one. Not because it was more extravagant, though Daniel did insist on a lavish ceremony at a vineyard overlooking the hills, but because this time, I woke up knowing I wasn't trying to prove anything to anyone, not to my parents, not to society, not to some illusion of forever I had built with the wrong man, but to myself, because this time, I wasn't marrying the idea of a future. I was marrying someone who had stood beside me during the ugliest, most hollow, most grief-stricken version of myself and never once tried to run. Someone who didn't fall for the perfect photos or the public applause, but loved me in the silence, in the ordinary. In the mornings when I didn't want to get out of bed, in the nights I stared at the ceiling wondering if healing would ever stick, and as the sun poured through the curtains that morning, Daniel knocked softly on the door, not to see me, but just to ask if I wanted breakfast brought up, and I told him no, that I wanted to come down and sit with him before the madness of the day started. And when I walked into the kitchen in my oversized robe and saw him standing barefoot in front of the stove, flipping pancakes, humming something old school and off-key, I felt this surge of quiet joy so deep it made my eyes sting, because after everything, I still got this love, safety, peace. And he turned around, spatula in hand, and grinned. "You look like trouble in that robe," and I laughed, leaning against the counter. "Good, I planned to cause some," and he kissed my forehead like we were already married 100 times over. And when the ceremony finally came, and I stood under the floral arch, watching him cry the second he saw me in white, I wasn't thinking about James, or Vanessa, or lawsuits, or pain, or Paris, or cold hospital beds, or broken contracts. I was thinking about how far I'd come, how I survived not just heartbreak, but betrayal, humiliation, silence, loss, and how I rebuilt everything from the ground up without losing the softness in me. And even when I did glance into the crowd and thought I saw James standing near the back, thinner now, older, dressed in that same suit I once bought him for our 5th anniversary, hands in his pockets, holding a bouquet that mirrored the one he used to propose with, I didn't panic, I didn't cry, I didn't even hate him. I just blinked and turned back to Daniel. Because that chapter was closed, sealed, buried under all the versions of me that I outgrew. And if it really was James standing there, well, then I hope he saw me smiling, hope he saw me choose myself in front of everyone, hope he understood that this moment had nothing to do with him, that this was never about revenge or proving who ended up winning. This was about healing and choosing peace after fire. And maybe for once he would realize that you don't lose people all at once. You lose them in all the moments you forget to hold them when they cry. When you don't show up at the hospital, when you miss the way their hands shake when they say, "I'm fine," when you make them feel like an afterthought while someone else holds their attention, and when you finally turn around, they're already gone, not physically, but in all the ways that matter. And now they stand at an altar holding someone else's hand, someone who showed up in all the ways you didn't. And that's a grief you don't recover from, not because it's dramatic, but because it's real. And as the vows ended and Daniel whispered, "I love you," against my cheek, the officiant pronounced us husband and wife, and we kissed not like people sealing a fairy tale, but like people who had bled their way to the right ending. And after the ceremony, Olivia pulled me aside and said, "You looked so unbothered. Were you really not fazed by the rumor that James came?" And I shrugged. He can come to the wedding. He just can't ruin it anymore. And that was the truth. because the old me would have spiraled, would have read into it, questioned my own happiness, wondered what it meant, but the woman who stood in her own power now knew that ghosts only follow you if you keep looking back, and I had stopped checking the rearview mirror a long time ago. And as the reception stretched into laughter and dancing and clinking glasses under the twinkle lights, I caught a glimpse of Olivia slipping Daniel her signature, "Protect her or I'll kill you" glare, and I almost choked on my champagne, and he just winked back, completely unfazed, because that was Daniel, unshakable, loyal, endlessly patient. And later that night, as we curled up in bed, tired from the weight of celebration, he wrapped his arm around my waist and whispered, "You still haven't told me what you saw in me," and I smiled into the dark. "You were always there. I just didn't know how to see people who didn't demand to be seen." And he didn't say anything for a long time, just kissed the back of my neck and said I'd wait another 10 years if it meant ending up here, and I believed him, because that's the thing about real love: it doesn't rush, it doesn't chase, it waits quietly in the background until you're ready, and when you are, it doesn't ask where you've been or who hurt you. It just says, "Let's begin," and that's what this was, a beginning, not a sequel, not a second chance, but a first chance with the right person, at the right time, after the wrong ones taught me everything I needed to know. And somewhere out there, maybe James finally understood that love isn't something you earn with flowers and promises and lavish dinners. It's something you nurture in silence, in loyalty, in presence. And by the time he realized that, I was long gone. Not just from his life, but from the version of myself who would have stayed. And now I live not to prove I survived him, but to honor the version of me who crawled out of that heartbreak and built something beautiful in its place. Not perfect, but mine. All mine.